The first sign was not fire or screaming or the sky tearing open, but a smell, faint and wrong, like rust soaked in old incense, drifting through the mid-hive corridors where the air recyclers had not been serviced in generations. I remember pausing beside a flickering lumen strip, my breath fogging faintly as I wondered if the manufactorum stacks above had vented something toxic again, and how easily the mind accepts small lies when the truth would be too heavy to carry. Hive Electo had endured plagues, ration riots, and the distant thunder of orbital war, yet it had always endured, layer upon layer of ferrocrete and faith pressing down on us like gravity itself. We believed, as all Hive-born do, that the city was eternal, that its bones were stronger than any corruption, and that whatever rot festered in the dark would be burned away by the Emperor's unseen gaze. We were wrong, and the wrongness was already breathing with us. Before the collapse, life continued with the stubborn rhythm of a dying heart. Servo skulls drifted through the transit halls chanting production quotas in cracked Binharik, while exhausted workers shuffled toward their shifts beneath banners of the Imperial Aquila, so faded they looked like shadows of eagles, rather than symbols of dominion. The Vox grills whispered prayers and announcements in equal measure, their voices blurring into a constant murmur that seeped into the skull and never quite left. I was a data slate auditor for the administratum, a functionary with ink-stained fingers and a mind trained to ignore suffering unless it affected the numbers. From my station in the mid-hive, I could look down through vast cathedral shafts and see the lights of the lower halves flickering like dying stars, and above me the spires vanished into smog so thick it felt like a ceiling. Somewhere far above, the nobles feasted and argued, secure in their altitude, and somewhere far below, men and women died nameless deaths, their bodies fed into the recycler vats to become something useful again. This was the natural order we were taught, and it worked until it didn't. If you find yourself drawn into this memory, if you feel the weight of that air and the slow dread creeping up your spine, then stay with me and lend this account your attention. The Imperium survives on remembrance as much as it does on steel and faith. And if this story grips you, pass it on, mark it, and bind yourself to more such chronicles, so that what was lost here is not lost entirely. Even in ruin, there is value in being witnessed. The second sign came as a sound. A low vibration felt through the soles of my boots rather than heard. A rhythmic thrum that did not match the pulse of the city's ancient machinery. At first it was blamed on the macro presses in the upper manufacturum districts, then on tectonic shifts in the bedrock. But the tech priests who descended to investigate returned with augmetic eyes unfocused and mechadendrites twitching, speaking only in fragments about data spirits, screaming and logic engines returning answers that tasted of blood. Rumors spread faster than official notices ever could. People whispered of unauthorized cult gatherings in the underhive, of symbols etched into walls that hurt to look at, of men who went into the darkness and came back changed, their smiles too wide and their voices too calm. The adeptus arbits increased patrols, their shotguns a visible reminder of order, but they were hunting shadows with rules written for daylight. I remember reviewing a requisition log one cycle later and noticing discrepancies. That made no sense. Entire hab blocks listed as evacuated for maintenance, yet production quotas from those sectors continued to rise. Servitors reassigned without proper rights, their flesh-bearing scars that did not match any sanctioned modification. When I flagged the irregularities and sent them up the chain, the reply came back stamped and final, instructing me to correct my figures and purge the originals. The ink bled strangely on the parchment, and for a moment I thought I saw it pulse. I told myself it was fatigue. Everyone did. The Hive teaches you that survival depends on knowing when not to ask questions. Then the lights began to fail in patterns, not randomly but in spirals and sigils that only made sense if you stood at the right angle and let your mind wander in dangerous directions. Children started having the same dreams, waking up screaming about a city that bled from its walls and sang to them in voices like their mothers. Ecclesiarchy preachers declared days of penitence, their sermons growing harsher, their eyes brighter, as if they too were listening to something beneath the words of the creed. The air recyclers pumped harder, struggling against an invisible taint, and the smell returned, stronger now, metallic and sweet, clinging to the back of the throat. Even the Emperor's statues seemed different, their stone faces caught in expressions that shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. Some claimed it was a test of faith. Others stopped attending services altogether and vanished into the lower levels. The collapse truly began on a cycle that should have been unremarkable. I was in transit shaft Delta 7 when the alarm sounded. Not the steady klaxon of a fire drill or the curt bark of a security alert, but a layered cacophony that overlapped and contradicted itself, as if the Hive's own Vox network was arguing with itself. The lumen strips flared to blinding white, then shattered, plunging the shaft into darkness broken only by emergency reds. The vibration underfoot intensified, resolving into a pulse that matched my heartbeat until I could no longer tell which was which. Around me, people froze, then surged, then screamed as the floor lurched sideways, throwing bodies against railings and into the open air. Far below, something vast and hungry roared, and the sound climbed the shafts like a living thing. As the city convulsed, the truth tore through the lies we had wrapped ourselves in. Entire underhive districts had been hollowed out. Their populations fed into blasphemous rites that twisted flesh and faith into offerings for powers that should never be named aloud. What we felt as tremors were the death throes of ancient support pylons, undermined by decades of secret excavation and warp-tainted sabotage. Chaos, that word we were taught to spit like a curse, was no longer an abstract threat on a distant battlefield. It was here wearing the faces of our neighbors, breathing through the vents, rewriting the city from the inside out. The Arbits fought bravely, their shotguns roaring in the dark, but for every cultist cut down, 2 more seemed to rise from the shadows, their eyes alight with a fervor that no pain could touch. I fled with the crowd, my data slate clutched to my chest like a relic, as if numbers and seals could still protect me. We poured into a plaza dominated by a massive statue of the Emperor, his sword raised toward a sky we could no longer see. Cracks spiderwebbed across the plinth, and as another shockwave rippled through the ground, the statue's head broke free and fell, shattering on the ferrocrete with a sound that echoed like blasphemy. Some fell to their knees and prayed louder. Others laughed high and hysterical. Above us, the Hive screamed as entire sections collapsed, habstacks folding in on themselves and plunging thousands into the abyss, their cries snuffed out by dust and darkness. Through the chaos, I glimpsed the response of the Imperium, swift and terrible. Valkyries roared through the smoke-filled shafts, their engines screaming, defiance as they deployed kill teams of the Astra Militarum into contested levels. Armored forms of Skitarii advanced with mechanical precision, galvanic rifles crackling as they purged corridors inch by inch, their tech priest overseers chanting litanies to calm the enraged machine spirits. For a fleeting moment, hope flared. Surely this was enough. Surely the weight of the Imperium would crush this rot as it had crushed so many before. But the Hive itself was betraying them. Corridors reconfiguring under warp influence, Auspex readings spiraling into nonsense, Vox links dissolving into laughter and screams. The worst came when the sky broke open. Not in a physical sense, but in a way that made the mind recoil. The Astronomicon still burned far away on Terra, its holy light a constant in every prayer, yet here its guidance felt dimmed, occluded by something vast and malignant pressing against reality. Some swore they saw shapes moving in the air, silhouettes clawing at the edges of perception, while others claimed to hear promises whispered directly into their thoughts, offering safety, power, release. I cannot say what was real and what was terror-fed hallucination. I only know that faith wavered, and where faith falters, chaos finds purchase. As the hours blurred together, the Hive's stratified order collapsed entirely. Nobles fled downward in desperate convoys, their finery torn and stained, while underhive gangers surged upward, seizing weapons and settling old scores amid the anarchy. Prometheum fires raged unchecked, their smoke choking entire districts, while emergency bulkheads slammed shut at random, sealing thousands into tombs of steel and concrete. I found myself trapped in a manufactorum sublevel with a handful of strangers, the walls slick with condensation and blood, the distant sound of chanting bleeding through the metal like a heartbeat. One man began to carve symbols into his own flesh, whispering thanks to something only he could see, until another put a bullet through his head and we all pretended it was mercy rather than fear. In those depths time lost meaning. We rationed water, listened to the city die around us, and waited for either rescue or the end. Once, a squad of adeptus custodes was rumored to have been sighted near the spire levels, their golden armor a beacon of the Emperor's wrath. But the story came garbled and second-hand, and no such figures ever reached us. Perhaps it was a lie born of desperation. Or perhaps they fought and fell far above, their deeds swallowed by the scale of the catastrophe. The Hive was too large, the corruption too deep. Even legends can drown. When the final collapse came, it was almost quiet. A deep resonant groan rolled through the structure as if the city itself were exhaling for the last time. Support columns that had stood since before my ancestors were born gave way, in a chain reaction that no force could halt. Whole sectors dropped into the void below, taking their histories with them. We were thrown to the ground as the floor tilted, then split and the darkness rushed up to meet us. I remember the taste of dust and copper, the sensation of falling without end, and a strange clarity as I thought of all the data I had filed, all the truths I had erased at another's command, and how small they seemed now. I did not die. I woke amid ruins half buried. The Hive above me, a shattered skeleton open to a poisoned sky. Rescue came days later, a grim procession of mechanicus servitors and silent soldiers who catalogued survivors. With the same efficiency they catalogued the dead. Hive Electo was declared excommunicate traitorous. Its name struck from official records. Its remaining population scheduled for quarantine and, eventually, cleansing. The Imperium does not mourn cities. It replaces them. As I was loaded onto a transport, I looked back at the ruins and wondered how many prayers had gone unanswered here, and whether the Emperor had turned his face away, or whether we had simply stopped listening. Now, as I set these words down, I do so not as an act of defiance, but of remembrance. Somewhere the ruins of that hive still cool, their depths crawling with things that should never have been born, their spires casting broken shadows across a world that will never fully heal. The collapse was not sudden, nor was it inevitable. It was the sum of 1,000 compromises, 1,000 silences, 1,000 small corruptions ignored until they became a god. If there is a lesson here, it is not a comforting one. The Imperium endures, yes, but it endures by burning away its own flesh, and sometimes the fire comes from within,